So y'all can sit here and ask me all the questions y'all want to.
Don't you ever talk about
Man, let's go. It's go time, baby.
I'm just about that action, boss.
You ready to go get it. You just like to do it.
That's what it is.
Defense trying to do that. Pass is caught back in. Can't chase it. What a catch! Jackson Smith and Are you kidding me? Baldwin. Oh my goodness, he caught it.
This is the HawksZone Rundown with your hosts Ryan and Bryce.
Welcome back, everybody. And the guest that I promised a few weeks ago, Bobby Peters, has joined me today on the HawksZone Rundown to break down in depth Clint Kubiak's offensive scheme, kind of where it comes from, how it's going to fit with this year's Seattle Seahawks roster. And Bobby's been great enough to bring some diagrams along. But Bobby, football coach, author, thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
Of course, excited to talk ball with you.
Perfect. So with that being said, Bobby, let's kind of get into Clint Kubiak a little bit here. We know he's got a history being in this Kyle Shanahan scheme. That's what he's kind of come out of. Obviously, his dad, Gary Kubiak, worked with Mike Shanahan in Denver for a number of years. And then obviously Gary went off to Houston, where he had a lot of success as a coach as well. What is the offensive philosophy of this Kubiak scheme as it's evolved in his time alone, Clint, from what his dad and Mike did in Denver?
Well, it starts with the outside zone run scheme, right? This is something Gary had been known for years, and then obviously his sons have kind of adapted to that philosophy, and obviously, being a part of the Shanahan tree as well. That's a huge part of what Kyle has done over the years. They've just pounded teams with different variations of this, and they've adapted over the years really well. So I think it's a great starting point when we want to talk about their offense. So the first diagram I wanted to talk about is a version of what coaches call full flow outside zone. So you've got the tight end, and in this case, a second tight end, which they often put in quotes the fullback. So you got two off ball, bigger skill guys working towards the outside to the play side. In this case, they're both comboing the end man on the line of scrimmage, working out to the cornerback. Now, so this is kind of, outside zone, the offensive line. What they're going to try to do is reach block the defensive line. So they're going to try to, work to the play side shoulder of the defender to try to seal an edge for the running back to work to the perimeter. Now, there's two nice things about this. Number one, the ball doesn't necessarily going to go outside on this play. It could cut back, just depending on how the defensive front wants to play it too. It gives the running back a lot of options. There's not just one hole that he's running to. He's got a lot of options to make this play pop for a big gain. And then the other thing I wanted to note about this specific diagram too is this is kind of a newer version that these guys have been running. So this version tasks the play side receiver to push crack the play side linebacker. So in this case, it's the Mike, it's the M in the diagram. Now, what this does is this effectively creates kind of a wall for the defense. So in this diagram, if our play side tackle, so the left tackle in the diagram, if he can reach the defensive end, this ball is going to be really scooting because we're sealing off the Mike, and now we're comboing that Sam out to the corner. So we're really creating a lot of space doing it that way. And then if say the left tackle doesn't reach the defensive end, well, now we've created better angles for our center and play side guard combination working back to the will. So most certainly we'll reach that nose guard back to the will. So we'll create a gap in there. So basically this version is going to cut off that defensive end on the left there. And this is kind of like I said, it's a newer version that the Shanahan guys have been running. Mike McDaniel has put on a clinic the last couple of years with this version. And I would expect to see Kubiak run some sort of version of this with the Seahawks next year.
So with this exact play, because it is the outside zone, when we look at, say, a running back like Kenneth Walker, who everyone thinks this scheme is going to fit greatly in Seattle, Zach Charbonnet, who we've had here, has been more of the downhill guy. How does your running back room have to adapt to this scheme? Is there certain running backs that fit it really perfectly and then others that are going to struggle in it? And when you look at Seattle's with Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, they drafted Damian Martinez this year out of the University of Miami. Who do you see having the most effect running this scheme for Seattle?
Not sure I can pinpoint one particular player, but I think what focusing on outside zone does is it asks a few different things of the running back. So the biggest thing, obviously, it requires a little bit more vision, right? So now we're kind of reading the front. We're kind of trying to decide where we're going to cut off of that. So the running backs have to have a good feel for it. Obviously, that getting reps in the system kind of helps with that. One of the critical coaching points is pressing the landmark. So you hear coaches say that. So in this version of outside zone, the running back is going to press the outside leg of the tight end that we're running to. And what that does is it forces the linebackers to commit to their gaps. And if the running back doesn't do this, if he tries to prematurely cut back, the linebackers can fall back and abandon a gap to the play side, and it basically, get an unblocked defender, like a run through. So running backs that press, like Bijan Robinson comes to mind, like he's brilliant at pressing his landmark until the absolute last second, and then he sticks his foot in the ground and makes the cut. And then the last thing that this asks of running backs is being decisive, right? When you have the ability to make a decision on a play, you've got to be decisive. So when they stick their foot in the ground and they make that cut, they have to stick to it and get north-south from there.
So the other thing I wanted to ask you about this is obviously this diagram is basically like kind of out of a 12 personnel look you've got here with the two tight ends. Now, if you're running to the left side here, like this is basically left outside zone, that initial tight end, is that generally going to be your main blocking tight end? Like you really are pressing him to help set that initial part of the zone. And then the move tight end that we've got coming across here, is he going to be more of a guy that you're going to want to have for later on with the play action to leak out and be more maybe the receiving threat, or is it a reverse flip in those two guys' roles, or do they need to be very similar in their skill sets?
No, I think the former. I think the way you described that initially is how the Niners usually call that. But they do, depending on game plan and depending what they're trying to do off of it too, they could flip the roles. But I think primarily that you're going to get that move tight end is going to be the off ball guy who's going to act as the fullback in this case, coming in motion across the formation.
Okay, perfect. So outside of this particular play, what's another staple of the Clint Kubiak offense there, Bobby, for one play that you'd probably look to and go, yeah, this is a staple they want to use?
Ooh, so we'll get to some of the play action stuff. So if you wanted to pull up one of the play action diagrams, the bread and butter early install Kyle Shanahan play action route is what I call a bang route. In their terminology, it could be called drift. I've seen it called strike in some of theirs. And what it is, it's basically a mini dig. It's a 7-step dig from one of the receivers, usually in like a cut split. And they do a really good job of formationing it. And so this is a good example. It's actually a really creative way to get to it, right? So they're in 11 personnel. We're going to return to orbit motion the slot receiver. We're going to pull a guard going the other way, and we're trying to hit the X receiver here, the receiver to the field on the bang route. Now, if that's covered up, we've got a nice little curl flat combination to the boundary with our running back checking over the ball as well. So we built like a full progression off of this for the quarterback. We're trying to hit that quick inbreaker over the middle. If you've watched the 49ers over the years, Jimmy Garoppolo, basically a huge percentage of his production would be on these plays on early downs, right? And if that receiver's covered via double team or via safety robbing it, there's some sort of check down or that backside swirl route the quarterback can get to in this version.
So one thing I wanted to ask about the philosophy of this, especially in this pass play here, is one thing that's been really talked about in Seattle right now is the fact that obviously we traded DK Metcalf this offseason, and a lot of national media outlets now have stated how Seattle needs a big X receiver in this philosophy, in this scheme to work. And the one thing for me, when I go back and look at the history of this offense, I look at, like, even if you go back to the Denver Broncos when Mike and Gary ran their system, Ed McCaffrey and Rod Smith had very similar skill sets. And you look at, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk in San Francisco. Yes, but both were very similar in their skill sets. Deebo was probably a bit better of an athlete. Ayuk might have been the better receiver. My question to you is, in Seattle, we've got Cooper Kupp and JSN. There's basically the 1-2 combo. In these design plays that, like you've got here, who would you say is more likely to be the X versus the Z? And does it really matter in the end if you don't have a big X receiver for this system to work?
I wouldn't say you need a big X receiver. I've seen this offense work with a lot of different type of receiver rooms. I think the biggest thing with receivers in this type of offense, with all the cut splits, the tight splits that they're asked to line up in, their ability to block in the run game. Like that first diagram we showed, we've got a receiver blocking a Mike linebacker. You've got to have the determination and will to do so. And I think, if you've got, Juwan Jennings, right? He's made a heck of a career in San Francisco being that sort of guy. He's one of the more valuable guys on their offensive side of the football because of what he does, for them in the run game. And I think, a lot of the routes in the pass game stuff, you can kind of build and fit to those guys' skill sets. But I think the desire and the ability to block in the run game is going to kind of determine, how much guys get playing time and where guys play and where they line up to.
So with this philosophy, the last question I'll ask you here, Bobby, is how much of it is like run to set up the pass versus pass to set up the run? Is there kind of a way they like to lean with this offense, especially Clint Kubiak, what he's done down in New Orleans, his time in Minnesota? Does he tend to lean one way more than the other, or is it more just an overall balanced attack?
Historically and traditionally, it's run to set up the play action stuff, and that's usually where the big plays have come over the years in this system. That's kind of been flipped a little bit in San Francisco. I feel like they're really focused on their drop back game and less so like on the play action. And the run game kind of fell off a little bit last year. Like I wrote a game planning book on their 2024 offense, and a lot of it was drop back pass stuff, and that's usually not the case when I'm writing about the Niners. So the system's flexible enough to kind of shift and morph. But as a coach who's studying what they do, their run game and then the play actions off their run game is really like what sticks out to me as like what makes the most sense in what they're trying to do.
Okay, so I want to kind of move on to a little bit more of a topic. So we talked a bit now on what kind of some staples of that Kubiak scheme in the outside zone to the bang route with the deep in breaker. So how do you see his scheme fitting with these weapons in Seattle? We alluded to JSN and Cooper Kupp there, but we got Kenneth Walker. Sam Darnold's now the new quarterback here. How do you feel this offense sets up for this 2025 Seahawk roster? Do they have the right pieces, or is there something they're missing maybe to get the recipe right?
Yeah, I can. So with the addition of Cooper Kupp, I did want to talk to that Lookie Route concept, that red zone one that we have, that diagram. So what the Lookie Route is, and Cooper Kupp ran this a ton in LA, and he was really good at it. And I feel like and this is also a staple in the Niners offense over the years too. So I have a feeling we'll see this for Seattle this year. So the Lookie Route is that receiver, the X receiver there to the wide side of the field. So in their offense, the Lookie Route is basically like a 4-yard option route. The receiver is either going to break out at 4 yards, run a slant, or he's going to sit down if there's, like avoiding the defense, or they're kind of bracketing him and trying to squeeze him. So that gives Cooper Kupp a 3-way go. And if he gets a one-on-one, that ball should be going to Cooper Kupp. Now in this diagram, we see the defense squeezing that route. And this is actually, I wanted to share this one too, because this is a creative red zone variation out of 12 personnel, where on the backside, we're taking advantage of it with what's called a stick nod route from the wide receiver there as the second read in the quarterback's progression, with the running back as the check down coming underneath on an angle route. So what we're creating on the backside here is, okay, they squeeze that Lookie route. Well, now we're creating a high-low on that will linebacker, and the stick route, the stick nod route wins on that free safety. So you see that free safety in the diagram. I show him biting down on the stick route there. So he's going to win over the top. And I believe this was a red zone touchdown. I can't remember what week it was for San Francisco last year, but this is a neat variation of a base concept that they've had success with over the years. And with the addition of Cooper Kupp, I think this stuff like this just makes a lot of sense to me.
So with this, and a quarterback in my background, I am one. So when I look at this and I see this, I'm basically going from X to Y. Your U and your Z are basically just running fade routes to pull that corner's attention, maybe get their backs turned so they don't see any of that in breaking work. And then essentially, like you said, the running back here is your check down, and you're hoping maybe the will overplays his flat and the Mike really bites on that Lookie route on the other side, and that's where you'd get to potentially your check down to the back, if I'm reading this correctly, right?
Yep, 100%.
Perfect. Okay, so with that being said, this is going to be probably a red zone staple play for Seattle. I got to ask you personnel-wise here. You'd have Cooper Kupp in the X, so obviously JSN plays that Z route. The U and the Y is an interesting thing in Seattle because obviously we have Noah Fant still on the roster. We had A.J. Barner, who actually proved to be quite a valuable receiving threat last year for this offense. They also have Eric Saubert, who was a San Francisco 49er tight end for a bit of time there and played within Kyle Shanahan's system, and Clint Kubiak. Who do you think you'd position in the stick nod to the U route? Would it be your receiving tight end is more that Y inline, and the U would be more of your blocker, or how would you play this if this was in the red zone, do you think, personnel-wise?
Yeah, you definitely want a good route runner to be on the stick nod route. But the thing, too, is if you've got a tight end, like a bigger body wide tight end that you've been calling the stick route for, in the middle of the field, have that same guy run it down here. It doesn't necessarily have to be your best receiving tight end. If you run a good route and you sell it, you don't have to, be like a Travis Kelce or Jimmy Graham type who's going to win one-on-one every single time. So it's more of the setup of the concept and then creating the leverage. If the defense squeezes the Lookie route, you should be able to win leverage back over the middle of the field.
So overall, would you say that the pieces Seattle has gotten this offseason, and a Sam Darnold who's definitely shown growth within the system from being with the Niners in 2023 to now being with, Minnesota in 2024 and Kevin O'Connell, who has been part of the McVay side of it. And the one thing I did want to ask you about that is how much of a different is it going from Kyle Shanahan to McVay to maybe Kevin O'Connell when it comes for a quarterback in the passing game, basically scheme and all? Is it a massive jump, have you noticed, or is it something where it's very similar in a lot of core concepts?
Yeah, there's definitely core concepts. I think, and over the years things have changed a lot, and they've, as time goes on, they kind of filter further and further away from each other. But I think still at the base and the philosophy of a lot of the pass game and what they're trying to do, I think starts in a similar spot. I think, a lot of these guys run choice routes, they run lookie routes, they run similar quick game, and a lot of the play action inventory is the same. But I think all three of those coaches you mentioned now probably have a very individualized, like 5-step family of concepts that they run. So there's definitely some stuff to learn. And I'm sure Clint's got his own ideas on what he wants to do in that category as well, but there's definitely some carryover. A lot of the philosophy is the same. A lot of the terminology is the same. The protections, there's slight tweaks to the protection rules for each of those systems too. But nothing that the quarterback, nothing that a guy like Sam Darnold couldn't, probably pick up pretty quickly.
So we'll go over a couple more. I know we got 2 more plays to look here that you've been nice enough to share with us. So which one should we start with? Should we start with the run play or should we start with the other pass concept?
Surprise me.
All right, let's go over this one. I'll pull this one up here and we'll go over this other variation of the run that you've got built in here. So explain the difference on this one, because obviously there's a slight difference. We can see the tight ends moving here, the move tight end, but what do you think that you'll see more of a fullback in this offense in Seattle? I know it's been a big talking point. Some of the reporters have said, Clint likes a fullback. They've used one before. Is it a real important piece to this offense?
Yeah, I think it's a critical piece. I think what is separated when the Niners are cooking and they're rolling, it's because their fullback I formation style run game has been at the center of what they're trying to do. And I think what separates it is it creates a lot of issues for defenses. And this is one example, and why I wanted to share it is we've got a ton of misdirection going on here. So at the end of the day, this is still outside zone. The offensive line is blocking outside zone. They're pushing to a safety in this case, that safety's in the box, but they're running outside zone. Now we're running, we've got that same, escort motion going back the other way. The tight end's going to bluff that end man on the line of scrimmage, the buck linebacker, the B in the diagram, and he's going to run an arrow route to pull, the flat defender, in this case, the will, out of the box. And then our fullback is going to slice back and block him. So what we're trying to do is widen that backside C-gap cutback. At the same time, these linebackers' gaps are moving double time here, right? There's a lot going on. There's a lot of eye candy. But for the offense, it's basically the same play call. So it's an example of, a slight tweak to a concept, but, hopefully there's a lot, it puts a lot of stress on the defense.
So for an offensive line perspective, and this is a big topic in Seattle because we haven't really had a great offensive line for probably a good decade. When you talk gap power scheme versus outside zone scheme or just zone scheme in general, what's an easier one generally for linemen to pick up and go with and obviously work as a unit as? Like we know zone, they're taking a lot of angles and stuff compared to gap power, which is a little bit more downhill and smash mouth. What one's generally easy to get a group on the board with before you start sprinkling in other concepts, like if you needed to add some gap power?
That's a good question. I don't know if I have an answer to that one. I think both present different types of challenges. I mean, with both, with both categories require a lot of communication, but outside zone, with guys moving in the same direction, there's more of a need for communication, I think. So outside zone might be a little more difficult, but the payoffs are definitely worth it in the end.
Okay, so outside of this one thing I wanted to ask you about with the quarterbacks, and this is one thing we've obviously seen for years in Seattle because we've been killed by it, is the quarterback's role in these outside zone run plays. So a big part of this is them booting away, correct? Because there is a lot built off of this in the play action. So it looks the same. So I know we don't have an exact play action play off of this in the images you sent, but if you were to basically run one off of this, would you basically be taking that outside left receiver and running him basically like on a bench corner route and the backside receiver on basically an in-breaker and boot your quarterback to that flat route that move tight end's running?
For sure. Yeah, I think, and there's so many different ways you can get to keeper concepts. And this is honestly, it's one of the one of the ways you can best protect the zone running game, right? You run these keepers, and what NFL coaches are trying to do is, first and foremost, they're trying to figure out how to account for that end man on the line of scrimmage. Sometimes they leave him unblocked. Sometimes they have different types of delay routes, shed routes on him. Sometimes they'll even pin him down from a tight end or receiver coming from the outside. And like you said, what they're trying to do is create like a three level flood to that side of the field. So we're faking outside zone one way. We're creating a flood to the other side of the field. So you got usually your play side receiver runs some sort of vertical. You've got the low crossing route coming from the opposite side. And then you've got somebody as the first in the flat to kind of round out that 3-level stretch.
All right. So we'll look at this other one you've got sent over to me here, and we'll have a look at this. This is more of another pass concept that you brought up, which is great. And we'll take a look at this one here. So what exactly are we looking for in this particular scheme setup here and design?
So this is a version of that bang concept we were talking about, right? So they're going to fake split flow zone there, right? I believe that's one of the tight end's going to come across and fake that escort motion and block the backside defensive end. And the quarterback's trying to throw the bang route here. Now, with that said, if we get cover 4, the defense can take it away. That boundary safety can drive on that route and take the route away. So what did the Shanahan guys, and this is a staple version of this concept in the Shanahan system, what do they build on the other side? They build in a concept that can beat cover 4. So what we're trying to do is that safety get that field safety and field corner to kind of bracket that outside receiver. So that slot receiver is going to kind of sell like he's blocking for a few counts, to try to win leverage on that flat defender. And then he's going to, what I call a stutter rail up the numbers there. And the Niners actually had a big play, a long touchdown against Dallas on this to Debo. The Cowboys played cover 4 to that side, and it was absolute teach tape of the concept. But this is an example of how they take that base concept, that bang route off play action that they always try to hit, and then they protect it with a concept on the other side of the field that's good against the trouble coverages for the bang route.
So, like, out of this particular thing, so they've got the fake there between the quarterback and the running back. Essentially, it's supposed to look like a zone off to the left. He basically checks and moves. Now, does that running back check and go to the flat, or is he straight off fake going to the flat just to see if he can pull what would be the will backer out of that box to let that in open up and behind?
That's a great question, and it depends what type of play action they're using. If they're selling outside zone to that side, usually the running back is not responsible for the play side linebacker, and usually he'll just maybe check like a corner blitz before going out and running his flat route. Now, if this is off like inside zone, like split flow inside zone action, that running back would be responsible for the play side linebacker. So yes, a lot of cases he is checking protection first on that side before he leaks out.
Perfect. All right. So I know you got, not a lot of time here, Bobby, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up my kind of couple last questions here for you. The last one being, what is your expectation for this offense in Seattle with Clint Kubiak? It's kind of been a hit or miss. It was on fire last season, when he started down there in New Orleans. Obviously, a bunch of injuries kind of derailed that. He was in Minnesota. They had some good success. Like, what is the expectation? Because there's so many variations of this offense now in the NFL, from Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, Kevin O'Connell, Clint Kubiak. And with the weapons Seattle has, what would you say, is kind of a realistic expectation for Seattle's offense to finish when it comes to overall offense in the NFL?
Yeah, I think what this system does is it raises the floor of expectations, in my opinion. I think, when you build around a strong, well-designed run game and you get offensive buy-in, you can control games that way, and you can chew up yards, chew up clock doing that. And then obviously all the play action stuff you can build off of it. That can create your explosives. That's where your explosives come from. Now, the trouble is sometimes with this type of offense over the years is like the third down efficiency and then some of the drop back stuff. There's definitely, they've definitely, like the Niners over the years have had good years with it too. But, if you can round that out, now we're really talking about potentially like a top 15 type of offense. But I think certainly raising the floor and doing that gives with the run game and then the play action shots off of it, gives the Seahawks at least a baseline level that they can work with.
So with that being said, the one thing I have a question about with this offense, and it's kind of been a thing that's been brought up, is how does it handle when it's stuck in a position of being behind? Like you were alluding to, a lot of the play action and stuff is kind of the main bit of the passing game. They do have drop back built in, but maybe it's not as effective as other teams with their pure drop back. How does this offense handle being behind a couple scores in a game? Does it have the ability in its actual scheme to come back, or is it more of an offense where if you're in a one score game or you're up by a score, it's a lot easier to maintain that throughout?
Yeah, it's definitely harder. I mean, obviously when your offense is built around kind of like early down, type concepts, run game and play action, like it'll definitely be harder. Like, I'm trying to think of some big comebacks, like maybe the Niners or even the Rams over the years have had. But like, the stronger your drop back game is, your 5-step stuff and your 7-step stuff, that's the stuff that allows you to come back quickly in games. And the stronger that package is, the stronger their ability to do so will be.
Okay, so Bobby, I really appreciate you coming on and giving us this breakdown of what kind of to expect out of Clint Kubiak's offense and the designs of it. For my listeners and stuff, where can they find more of your content? I know I've found a bunch of it, but let our listeners know where to find you, where to find your content, and everything like that you got going on.
Yeah, I run Alert the Post, so alertthepost.com. That's kind of the starting point. I try to post a couple articles every week there, and then every week at least one cut up as well. So at the top banner up there, you can find the link to the cut up library. So I've got a running list of all the different cut ups I've posted, and then most of them usually have a little breakdown or even a longer breakdown of some of the concepts on there too. And then I have a banner up there that can take you to all the books that I've written. I think at this point, shoot, I was thinking of this earlier. I think I've written over 1,000 pages on Kyle Shanahan's offenses. I think over the course of 4 different books. So I've definitely done a deep dive on what he's all about. So if you're trying to take that deep dive, if you like what we've been talking about here, those books are a great place to check it out.
Perfect, and I'll make sure that those links are in the description below on the channel. Bobby, thank you so much for your time, man. Would love to have you back in the future to break down some more of this stuff.
Of course, thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Bobby.